Having basically soundproofed all of my car, I am looking to go the extra mile to see if it's worth soundproofing the hood to make the engine quieter, or is it just a big waste of time and money? Well, I'm going to do all the work for you and spend all the money, so I could tell you if it's worth doing or not, and also what you should look out for along the way. And to make it easier, there are chapters for this video, so do skip around if needs be. And as always folks, disclaimer, this video is for entertainment purposes only, don't try this at home. Firstly, you might be wondering why anyone would want to do this. And the reasoning here is that engine noise on some cars can be really loud, especially my little Toyota Aygo, as their 3-cylinder engines are well known for being noisy. And when you've made the rest of the car quieter, the remaining sounds that are left can sometimes sound more pronounced. So what we want to do is lower this engine noise by soundproofing the hood, and some products that exist out there specifically state that they provide excellent acoustic absorption and damping characteristics, especially when installed in a vehicle environment. So essentially, these things should work at making the engine quieter. But do they? Well, I have installed sound deadening mats previously and noted little improvement. So what I will be doing is removing the thin 50mm kill mat deadening mats along with the sound absorption I have added, as well as the basic sound absorption mat that comes factory installed. And I'll be replacing all of that with basically better stuff. And you might quickly see why soundproofing the hood is likely the only option for a lot of people, because of course we would love to soundproof the firewall, but for me it's really tightly packed back there, and even if you wanted to install anything to the firewall, you'd essentially have to rip the current firewall insulation out, which is a huge job. And even if you didn't want to go that route, the only other option is removing the entire dashboard. And besides it being a lot of work, if that's your only car, you don't want to be going this route if you don't have the experience. So what we are going to try and do is use super materials to kind of fill that gap instead. Speaking of the materials, we are going to be using a 3mm thick sound deadening mat from the UK based Dodo mat that comes as a pack of 30. So you don't really need to worry about measuring your hood for coverage, as 30 pieces is more than enough for this build. And with the extra pieces left over, these can be used for other parts of your vehicle, so you can spread the cost out that way and make your build a little bit more cost effective. For this build, I ended up using about 5 mats, but my car is on the smaller end of the scale, so your usage may vary. And this material is Dodo Mat's premium offering, so that essentially means the butyl rubber in this product is meant to be much purer than their standard offering, which should make the vibration damping qualities better, which after all is the primary use for sound deadening mats. So vibrations traveling up the car, hitting the hood, should be lessened, and he is hoping this will be a real upgrade when compared to the epoxy 50mm mats that were on there previously. If you can't get a hold of Dodo Mat because you don't live in the UK or you want to try other options, for American viewers, Resonix seem to come well rated as a premium option. Australians have access to the premium offerings that car builders sell that come well recommended, and if you're in Europe, Comfort Mat or Vibro Filter have been recommended by previous commenters, so you have some options if you're looking for more premium materials where you are, but I obviously can't recommend these myself as I haven't used any of them. For me, I went with Dodo Mat as they are local to the UK and have tons of experience offering quality materials that I have tested in quite a few areas of my car, and I've been really impressed with them. And no, they don't sponsor this channel. All the materials you see are bought out of this very, very unwilling Yorkshireman's pocket. Touching on safety, these mats are flammability tested for vehicle interiors and are fully water and oil resistant as shared on the website. But obviously, for any product that you are looking to buy, please be sure to read up on what they do from a safety perspective so that you feel confident that you've got the safest option out there. To go over this, we are going to be using Dodo Mat's Bonnet Liner Pro, and it's important that you go for something like this rather than just a standard closed cell or open cell foam, because you obviously want whatever material you are putting on your hood to be able to withstand engine temperatures, which this one does as it's rated from -30 to 100 degrees, and it's also fire retardant to vehicle standards, so you can rest assured that it is as safe as can be. be. As always, do your own due diligence on this. The material in question that I'm using is a 12mm thick material that essentially adheres to the hood, and you should have no problems with it falling off as it is super sticky. It comes as one large 1.2 square meter sheet, which I used about half of just to cover the replacement standard foam. And if you're looking for an alternative, if you can or don't want to use Dodo Mat products, it would be worth searching for bonnet or hood liners, and hopefully you should be able to find something that you like the look of. And an open cell foam material like this option from Dodo Mat should be able to help us absorb some of that engine noise and basically make the ride quieter and more comfortable as a result. Lastly, there are a couple of materials worth mentioning that will help bring this all together, and the first is a prep spray, or more commonly known as a degreaser, and this is something that is great to have to clean your panels before you put any of this stuff on. You don't want to be attaching any of this material to a surface that has any dirt, grease, or dust on there, so using something like a prep spray will really help to make sure your panels are as clean as they can be. What will also help will be some finishing tape like this one from Gladiator, and it serves a couple of purposes relating to sound damping mats specifically. You can use it on the edges of your mats if you notice the butyl material underneath the mat spreading, and this will essentially stop that, which is helpful as generally speaking, the more a material thins out, the less useful it will become, and this can essentially happen if a material is in contact with another panel that might push the butyl out of place, or it may expand over time if exposed to the elements, so it's a good way to stop the butyl walking. It's also great for covering gaps or tidying up any ripped aluminium or any holes that your mats might develop as a result of being a bit too harsh with a roller, or the mats having to contour to odd shapes on your car. And for both of these, I think you'll be able to find plenty of options wherever you are, so you should be good. And now we've covered the materials, we can jump into the tools you'll likely need to get the job done. Firstly, to get all these studs out that are holding in the hood lining that comes with the car, you'll need some interior trim tools, and I find this stud removal tool super handy, and I've used it on a bunch of places like the wheel arch lining, the door card, and the cabin carpeting on the floor, and it's really made life much easier. Of course, you could use something like a flat-headed screwdriver, but I think it's really worth picking some proper interior trim tools up, as you will get the use of them in tons of places. You'll also need a ratchet set or spanners that will be used to remove the hood. You can soundproof the hood while it's still attached if you prefer, but I think you'll likely find it easier to do with the hood detached. So a decent set of spanners or a ratchet set will come in really useful. In addition to these, for application of your mats, you're going to need some kind of roller, and there are typically two types of rollers. One is smooth and the other is ridged. Most professionals will tell you that you should use a smooth roller, as using a ridged one tends to squash the butyl rubber down too much, making it thinner, so you'll lose some of the effectiveness of the mats. So this time around I'm using a smooth roller, but I've used ridged ones in the past for hard to reach places too. You'll also benefit from scissors to cut your mats with, and in my experience, if you've got decent materials, you should be able to cut them with scissors, and these materials shouldn't make too much of a mess of them, and that's basically all you're going to need. So now we can get into the installation. The first thing we want to be doing is to remove the hood so we can work on it without having to crane your neck. But before that, you'll want to mark where the hood sits so it makes it easier to reattach later. If you don't do this, you may misalign your hood, and so when you put it back on, this will mean that you'll have uneven panel gaps. So you definitely want to take the time and make sure it's done. You can then begin to take the hood off, which is held on each side, in my case, by two 12mm bolts that come off really easy. And once you're done on one side, it's just a case of doing the same on the other side, and then you can rest the hood on the engine bay, go and grab yourself a box or a sheet that you can pop the hood on, and then bring it over so you're ready to work on it. Once laid flat, the first thing you want to do is use your stud removal tool, or clip removal tool as some people call it, to remove the clips holding the factory installed hood liner on. Once you've done all of them, you'll then be able to remove the factory installed hood liner so you can install your sound damping mats. But you don't want to do that just yet, as we need to clean and prepare the surface first. With living in the UK, you're always going to get a bit of rain, so the first task for me was to wipe away all the rain and condensation that had built up, and I did this with a dry microfiber cloth. Once done, done, I then sprayed some prep spray, more commonly known as degreaser, onto the hood and used a paper towel to wipe it dry. And this stuff is really going to ensure that your surfaces have no excess grease or dirt on them, as when applying sound deadening mats, you really want these surfaces to be as clean as possible so that you aren't leaving space for water to enter that will potentially create rust, or leaving things like lint on there that will stop your mats adhering properly. Now we are ready to apply our mats, and you can see straight away that I'm taking a look and apply approach rather than strictly using a template of any kind, which is very much my style. But if you do have the patience for templates, then you'll likely get a better finish by doing this, and it will allow you to get more complete continuous coverage. And this is important, as the more gaps you have in your sound deadening mats, the worse the material will do at stopping vibrations. But you always have to measure the approach you take against what you're actually covering, as these days most modern cars have complex shapes and they are a real pain to make templates for. Once you're happy with the coverage of your mats, you can go over them with a roller, and fast forwarding a bit, you can see that I've gone for full coverage here. But if you want to keep the weight down, you can go for between 30 to 50% coverage, but most professionals encourage full coverage just because most people aren't sound engineers, nor do they have the full range of equipment to accurately calculate what partial coverage they should go for. But you could likely shoot for 50% and you'll still likely get most of the reverberation out of your panels. But my preference is to always go for complete coverage in most cases. And when applying this material, you should be able to get away with using scissors to cut it if you've got decent quality materials. And this does make application much easier rather than having to fiddle about with a knife and cutting mat. You also might notice that when you've applied your mats, you may see the butyl material stretching at the edges, which you can use a finishing tape to cover, as you don't want the butyl material running away and thinning your mats out over time. Equally, it's also great for covering imperfections in your application, going around holes, or applying over tears in your mats. And once done, you'll have something that looks like this. And this means that now we're done here, we can apply our second layer on top of this one. The second layer will be our hood liner replacement, and I won't be covering the whole hood here, but rather covering to match the original fit and finish of the factory installed hood liner. And that's because I don't want to impede any of the functionality of the hood itself, but some people do opt for full coverage, and that's something you might want to explore. This material is thicker than the factory installed version, and because the old stuff had been on there for 10 years, I'm expecting some improvement in performance here. And this material, when you're working with it, is a little tricky to work with, and you'll see that when I use the old hood liner as a reference, I am overcutting on purpose. And this is because when sticking down this material, it is really sticky and it adheres to creases really well. And the issue here is that if you end up cutting yourself short material wise, these creases will just basically end up eating that material up, and you won't have enough to cover what you actually need to. So that's why you're seeing me cut as I go, just to avoid having this lack of material. I started carefully by peeling away the backing and started with the straight edge as a guide, just because it's easier. I then slowly started peeling the backing away and sticking as I went. I had to make a few cuts for the hood, and once I cut to the shape I needed, I just continued to cut and apply and lightly roll over the material with a roller, just to make sure it's properly stuck down. You can see that I'm making cuts to match the contour of the area I want to cover, and you can see while it's not perfect, it follows the original material quite closely. And after quickly checking my work, I made the biggest cut to this part of the hood, as we don't want to be impacting the locking mechanism in any way, so that definitely needs cutting around. And then the next part on the other side was pretty much the same as the opposite side, and once you're done, you can see that this material adheres really well, but it does look a little bit crinkly after applying it, but it's nothing I'm particularly worried about. And it's then the case of just reattaching the hood back on, which is simply the reverse of taking it off. And when it's back on and attached, you just want to make sure all the panel gaps are good, and we can then get to the fun part, which is testing to see if all of this work has been worth it or not. When looking at the results, we are going to cover quite a lot of ground here, starting with how the results were captured, what the results sound like by just listening to them without decibel readings, why decibel readings don't matter, what a rev test reveals, as with it being related to engine sound, we want to make sure that we can hear if the materials are working as intended or not without the interference interference of wind and road noise. We'll be looking at what improvements we can see to frequency by looking at spectrogram samples, what perceived daily improvements you'll notice, how much doing something like this will cost you and how much time it'll take, what are the negatives of doing something like this, like for example weight and miles per gallon, and what improvements can be done to the process overall to make it potentially even better. Starting with how these results were captured, I recorded everything on my phone with an external mic that does not automatically adjust the gain. If you're not familiar with automatic gain, it's basically the default on most phones that adjusts mic sensitivity so that you get a consistent audio level. My external mic does not do this, so what you're hearing is unfiltered. And when I recorded these results, I always try and travel on the same roads to make the comparisons as fair as possible, and I make sure if stationary, all test conditions are the same. I also try and do them on the same day where possible to try and mitigate the difference in circumstances, as one day might be windier than the next. And I never record in the rain, as it just makes results too hard to compare. And with that said, before looking at these spectrogram or decibel results, just have a listen first to see how much of difference you can perceive in these next set of clips. Now normally I would do a test of me driving around at various speeds to try and get a clear before and after example to see if these new materials are actually working or not. But in this case, because the focus is lowering engine noise, it doesn't really make any sense to do a driving test and have all that wind and road noise getting in the way. So what we've replaced it with in this instance is this rev test, where you can hear what the car sounds like at idle, what it sounds like under load at 3000 revs, and then again at 5000 revs, which loosely simulates your car under load when accelerating and pulling out of junctions. And depending on how good your hearing is, as we have to remember that hearing is very subjective, you might have heard a slight difference there, but for me, I couldn't notice much difference at all. But before I go ahead and make any quick conclusions, I wanted to look over a spectrogram sample just to see if I could see any differences in frequency. But before we do that, a quick word about decibels. As regulars of the channel know, at this point I would be looking at my decibel meter and calculating some averages to give you a figure that purely relates to sound pressure. But when you are revving a car to death, the jumps and dips in decibels would be huge. And also, even if you did calculate them, the number you'd get wouldn't really tell any useful, consistent story, at least in my view, that you could actually take anything from. But a spectrogram, on the other hand, will give us a great visual and allow us to see straight away if these materials are making any difference or not at the frequency level. And to do that, we can dive into Audacity and look at the spectrogram version of our clips, which really does allow us to see the potential benefits up close and personal. And if we start off by looking at the spectrogram version of our audio clips at idle, we want to be diverting our attention to the little yellow sliver you can see here between the 0 to 1000 range. And the reason we are looking here is because that's typically where engine noise lives, somewhere between the 1 to 2000 range. And as it is a lower frequency sound, it does make it harder to get rid of, and you'll see at idle that seems to be the case, as it's essentially the same in the before and after clip. But this gets a bit more interesting when we start looking at the 3K and 5K rev samples. At 3K, you'll notice straight away that the yellow sliver that we saw previously now almost looks wave-like, and this is because you can now visually see the engine noise ramping up when the car is being revved, which again loosely simulates how you'd use your car to get up to speed on the motorway. And if you were to draw a line at the highest point between the revs, it basically gives an average that we can view to see if the sound is going down or not when comparing the before and after clips. And as you might be able to see, the values are essentially the same in the before and after clip, hanging around at the 1K mark. And if you were hoping the story might be different at 5K revs, it's very much the same, with really none of the engine noise being suppressed or absorbed by the new materials. So it left me wondering if there was anything more I could do. And there is hope, as I stumbled across a new material that is not only potentially better, but also easier to install. But before we get to that, if you are getting value from this video, please do drop a like below so it can help this video spread. And if you are feeling extra nice, please consider donating via Buy Me a Coffee, which really does help not only keep me caffeinated, but it also keeps the channel alive and allows me to buy materials to use and test. YouTube money only goes so far, and the real value is you, as it's people like you who keep this channel alive by watching and donating. So if you do want to donate, the link is below. Thank you very much. Now back to this new material. I went on a bit of a search and came across these acoustic blankets that basically lay on your engine that are sold by a company called Noise Killers in the UK. And I was really hopeful, as from reading the reviews, people seem to be getting results in reducing engine noise. So I took the plunge and decided to get a small mat that was rated for covering my small engine. And when it arrived, you really can feel the quality here. So hopes were raised. The small size that I picked up is a 500 by 500 millimeter blanket, but you can get medium and large sizes too, as well as requesting custom made blankets if you need them. But they oddly don't seem to tell you how thick they are, which is a bit of an oversight, but I can tell you they are roughly the thickness of a single thin duvet, and they essentially work by having an inner layer of lead surrounded by an outer layer of foam that should drastically reduce engine noise and general clatter from the engine bay. And they are fire retardant as well, so you have that element of safety. But as always, do make sure you do your own due diligence before picking anything like this up. Moving on to installation, these acoustic blankets basically need to sit between the engine and the outer firewall, so you just need to push them as far back as they can go so they sit between the engine and outer firewall nicely. But you obviously need to be mindful of what you are pushing against, as you don't want to accidentally unplug anything, and this may take a bit of wiggling and fine tuning, but once you've got it into place, you can then use the milled holes that are covered in brass to safely attach the acoustic blanket to your engine by using something like cable ties or whatever you have to hand, and this will help keep your acoustic blanket in place. And once sorted, this now allows us to do some testing to see if they actually work. One thing you might notice from this test straight away when compared to the previous one is the difference in frequency across the board here. I noticed even at idle that the tone has changed to a much duller tone that sounds more muted, which suggests to me that the acoustic blanket is doing its job. But to confirm that, we are going to look at the spectrogram analysis just to be sure. As we did previously, we want to be diverting our attention to the little yellow sliver you can see between the 0 to 1000 range. And again, the reason why we're looking here is because that's typically where engine noise lives, somewhere between the 1 to 2000 range, and it is a lower frequency, which of course does make it harder to get rid of. And you'll see at idle this time around that the results are pretty similar to the last time, but there are some improvements in the 3K to 5K rev clips. You might not notice it straight away, but when you draw the same line across the results to get a picture of what is going on, you can actually see that in the after clip the engine noise is actually being pushed below the 1K threshold, and this also holds true at 5K as well. So it appears that the acoustic blanket does offer some benefit, but how do these results play out in real life? What I mean is, will you actually notice them on a day-to-day basis when you're driving about? Well, as we've seen from the spectrogram analysis, you can really see that they do work, and having driven around with the blanket attached, I can report experientially that the difference you'll notice on a day-to-day basis, in my view, will actually be quite minimal, and that's at all speeds, and it's likely not as noticeable because the engine noise isn't constantly at the same level, as it's always going up and down when you rev the engine. Whereas if we're talking about wind noise or road noise, you might actually feel the benefit more in day-to-day use, as these sounds are generally consistently the same. So you tend to feel the benefit more as the sound has been consistently lowered and generally does not change. But here you're only really noticing it in short intervals when you rev the engine, and when it's so low that you barely notice, it's hard to say that you're getting the benefit of it as much much as you would if you soundproof your car for lowering wind noise, for example, but it might make a world of difference if your engine is clattering and creating all kinds of sounds on a constant basis. Additionally, if you do want to soundproof your hood with premium materials like I did, it is worth mentioning that there may be benefits outside of lowering your engine noise that might work for you. To be clear, I was comparing my hood results with the stock installation, which is basically just one piece of foam, against my new installation of sound deadening mats plus a new thicker foam. But if your car has nothing on it from stock, you might very well see a huge improvement in regards to getting your engine noise down. A secondary consideration is this very much might be worth doing if you live in a really hot place and want to limit radiant heat coming from the engine, which could be quite beneficial for folks living in hotter climates. For me, I live in the UK, so we get sunshine about one day a year, and it's normally always tepid temperature wise. But if you're in a hot climate, this very much might help keep you cooler. But again, before doing any of this, you have to consider the cost as well, as it may just tip you into the, nah, I'm not doing this, when you find out how expensive it is to do. Starting off with the acoustic blanket to cover the engine, this came in at £99, and that's for the smallest option. So once you start looking at larger offerings, they only get more expensive from there onwards. And if you want to soundproof your hood on top of that, like I did, by using premium materials, you'll be splashing out for one box of 3mm Dodomat Pro sound deadening mats that contains 30 mats, which cost £90. But you have to keep in mind that you likely won't need all of these, so the spare mats that you haven't used can be used for other parts of the car too. But to cost this more accurately, I used 5 mats for the entire hood, giving us a material cost of about £3 per mat. So this means it cost me £15 in actual used materials, and the same can be said for the Bonnet Liner Pro. As for the cost of the full bonnet liner, you're looking at a cost of £80, but I used half of it, so the cost for me was £40 in used material. So up front for all the materials you'd be paying around £269, but in used material cost it would be closer to about £154. But we have to remember that there isn't just a material cost here, as there is a time cost too. In terms of time, I spent about 4 hours soundproofing the hood, so that's inclusive of applying the sound deadening mats as well as the Bonnet Liner Pro, and doing all of the assembly and disassembly too, which is something you'd be able to do in an evening after finishing work, or you could pick a day in the weekend to do it and still likely have half of the day left. So it's not the most intensive task in the world time-wise, but before investing any time and money into doing a task like this, are there any negatives you need to watch out for? One of the first things that people always ask is, how much weight is this going to add to my car, and is it going to impact miles per gallon? And my answer here is that because you're adding such limited quantities of each material, the impact to weight is going to be close to non-existent in my view. I used 5 sound deadening mats, with the box of 30 coming in with a weight of about 13.9 kilograms. So each mat weighs about 0.4 kilograms. So with us adding 5 mats, we've added about 2 kilograms in weight. The half of the Bonnet Liner Pro I applied weighs about 0.7 kilograms. So you're looking at a total for both of about 2.7 kilograms, or we can call it just under 3 kilograms. And if you added the acoustic blanket to that on its own, that actually weighs 3 kilograms in my case, as it is the smallest variant. So it looks like I've added about 6 kilograms of weight. So in inanimate object terms, that's the equivalent in weight of about 3 bags of sugar, or a medium bowling ball if you bowl, which shouldn't impact miles per gallon too much. I typically get around 42 miles per gallon on a short journey and 50 on a longer one, and these numbers remain the same for me. But of course, it may be different for you, but there's something that bothered me way more than this. When I was out and about testing the acoustic blanket from noise killers, I decided to pull over and remove it just to try and get the full effect of what it might sound like with and without it. And as I was removing it, it got a little caught on something, but I didn't think much of it and I just popped it on the back seat. But when I got home, I looked at it and noticed that there was a hole in it and the material from inside has started seeping out. So I don't think these are as robust as they could be. So if you were to ask me if I was to do this again, what would I change to improve this? And the answer is quite resoundingly that I wouldn't bother doing any of this in my case, as the changes changes, in my experience, are just too negligible for the cost of all the materials, and instead, if you want to focus on lowering engine noise specifically, it really does look like you'd have to put in the work and either remove the entire dashboard to see how you could soundproof behind it to lower engine noise, or somehow rip the fireproofing material out that sits behind the engine and consider better ways to soundproof that area. And for me, this is just not realistic, as this is my only car and it's not a job I feel I could do in a day and then have my car put back together so I can actually use it. And if you are going to invest this level of time and effort into lowering your car noise more generally, I think your time would be much better spent focusing on these two areas instead.